Lisa, you talk about the importance of, or the fantasy, the ideal of having candidates who would actually, make good decisions and bring about change. Would you ever consider running for political office? Would we ever see a representative?
It's interesting. When I was younger, people used to say, "Lisa, you're going to be the first woman president." But today, in this day and age, Homeland Security says I'm a terrorist. They put me on the terrorist watch list. I can't even fly. So even if I wanted to, I don't really know. I've been so tainted by the government for being a nonviolent activist equals terrorism. It's really outrageous, actually.
Okay, so Lisa Fithian crossed off the list for potential. How about Lize Mogel? How about a representative or a congressman or senator, Cornel West? I mean, is this, you guys, is this something you ever think about? You're political people.
I would run for city council, actually. I have a huge respect because I work for small nonprofit organizations, social justice organizations, and I have a real respect for elected officials at the very local level because quite often they really do honestly represent the community, and I've seen that happen. Although I have to say that being an elected official is a more than full-time job. So I have great respect for that. That would be the thing that would hold me back.
The hours.
You're never out of work. I mean, it's sort of like being an artist, but a little more serious things that you're dealing with on a daily basis. So.
And I want to be clear that a city council member from New York City was on the front lines of Occupy Wall Street, and he was pummeled by the police because he was leading a march.
Well, that's true. That's true. I think it has to do with what one's calling is and how one understands that calling. And this is very important for young people because you get career thrown in your face and the qualitative difference between the job that you have and the life task that you take on. And my calling is that of being a blues man in the life of the mind and a jazz man in the world of ideas, which means I am a Jesus-loving, free black man who tells the truth and bears witness, which means I'm not a good candidate.
All right. So we'll take that as a maybe.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing. But I think it's important that people feel empowered to get involved in politics in that sense. Because like Lisa said, we need good politicians because right now this is the way that the country works. And it's not really going to go anywhere soon. Unless some aliens come down or I don't know. I mean, we'll see what soon is. But I think it's important for people to feel empowered to do this kind of work because it is important work, and we do need more, many more honest people who are sincere about helping their community in office. And you can do a lot of good when you're in office. You can also do a lot of harm, as we've seen. But
when I moved to Texas, I found out that the legislature met only every 2 years, and I was outraged. I was like, that's outrageous. They should be meeting every year. And they're like, you don't understand. They only do bad things. And when I was like, oh yeah, could they meet every 6?
Damage control, okay.
Not meet at all.
All right, so I'm gonna change the topic one more time here before we open up the conversation to our audience. I'll use this as an example. We're getting ready to do this program, and I get handed this iPad, and this is how we're going to be taking questions this evening. Here's how it works. I don't know how to use this thing, but there are people out there who are politically engaged, who are a demographic that are younger than anyone you see up here, and much more skilled at these sorts of devices and all of the wireless mobile technology. What I'm trying to say is, on the one hand, this kind of a thing, as Dr. West says, could be one of the arsenal of the weapons of mass distraction in this disintegrating culture of ours. On the other hand, devices like this can, help protesters in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Cairo, organize, figure out where the next gathering is going to be, figure out what block to go down, and then they find themselves disconnected by a government that shuts down the internet. So what do you make of the role of technology? I mean, the people who are involved in these demonstrations, involved in this change, involved in these assemblies, are young people. They're tech-savvy people. And is this going to be part of their revolution as well?
I think technology is just another tool among many, and it can be used well. For example, I really appreciated, because I couldn't participate on Monday, I had to work. But I watched a lot of what was going on live stream, a couple of live streams simultaneously, and looked at a bunch of different Twitter feeds. And so I really appreciated that I could get like minute by minute updates as to what was happening, and it made me feel like a little bit more a part of it, even though I was sitting, in front of my computer. So I think there's a certain, I think that social media is useful, but it's definitely not the revolution. And I think, there was some talk about Tahrir being the Twitter revolution, or even some of the demonstrations in Iran, but then that was kind of later debunked when it looked at who was actually using Twitter. There was thousands and thousands more people who were participating who weren't wired. And I think that when you're talking about any sort of social movement, there's going to be a huge range of people, and there's going to be a lot of people who aren't wired, who don't have access to the technology, and who are shut out from that kind of participation. So I think it's really important to not fetishize technology, especially when you're talking about social change, until we all have little chips implanted in our heads. It's coming.
David Cronenberg made a crazy movie about that. Please, Lisa Fithian, go ahead.
I mean, I would say ditto to all of that. I mean, there's incredible potential and power to these tools until they get unplugged. And I mean, the bigger question in my mind is that we're losing the ability to do one-on-one organizing, relationship building, eye-to-eye contact, and that's really fundamental. And that's, again, I think, a part of what we have to rebuild in our communities, and not all these distractions and other tools that we're in. So I honor their value to them. I recognize their limitations, and again, I guess you've also said it, but it's privileges certain people, and other people don't have access. And so whenever we are using things that privilege some and not others, we have to just really look at what that is and figure out how do you balance that out.
There it goes right there.
There's one.
Somebody's getting connected. But I just want to say one quick thing, because I agree it could be a tool for positive or negative. But one of the great commentators of American civilization, Alexis de Tocqueville, wrote Democracy in America. He turned that second volume in Book 2, Chapter 18. He talks about why Americans are so restless in the midst of prosperity. When he talks about the emergence of addictive behaviors of persons who find it difficult to relate to other persons and therefore fill the time and void by various kinds of addictions. And there's a variety of candidates. That's 1840. This is 2012. And then he links it to a strange melancholy among a people who find themselves so rootless that they're unable to find sustaining structures of feeling and structures of meaning that sustain them from womb to tomb. Now, he didn't say it that way, that's my language, but that's what he was getting at. And that is a spiritual, psychic, and cultural challenge, is what Eugene O'Neill was talking about in The Iceman Cometh. The addictive orientation as a way of displacing relation, connection, bonds that are healthy and mature and nurturing rather than just stimulating and titillating. So that I do think that technology can take on a life of itself and become a fetish in that addictive behavior, but still use the positive for good with mature, committed, empathetic persons.
Quickly, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing to the technology. The other thing to be aware of is that, a lot of this technology is pretty new, and people get very fascinated by it. They like to use it, but it's also completely surveilled. As there's just, the Twitter case. I don't know if people have been paying attention to this, but Twitter was
Just forced to turn over some of its records of one specific person's tweets who was arrested on, I think, the Brooklyn Bridge. I did a little talk for some of the sculpture students today, but I was saying, we all are kind of geolocated now. All of our cell phones have maps, we can use maps, we can find out where we are, but that also means that someone else can find out where we are. And there was just an article, I can't remember where, that basically says, your phone is not a device to make calls with, it's so that people can track you. So I think that's something to really be aware of, is that even though Twitter and all of this stuff is really useful for social movements, it also allows them to be much more surveilled at the same time.
Thank you for adding that.
So, okay, so we are going to get to our audience here, and maybe we can do this sort of as a, keeping in mind that maybe this can be sort of a speed round of thoughts and reactions, because we do have a lot of comments. Thank you for all your comments and questions. We got, I think, about a half hour left in our program. So, one of the texters says, thank you for not failing to send in some provocative thoughts. We have a texter here who says, is it wrong to sort of admire the Westboro Baptist Church and their methods of demonstration? This, of course, is the church that takes it upon themselves to find, if I'm not mistaken, the funerals of fallen soldiers to go and picket about anti-gay issues. Does that sum it up? What the issue is with them? So the question is, I think what the texter is trying to say is, are their tactics something to be sort of strategically admired because they've made such a splash?
Well, it's the same tactics that people use when they picket in front of Mayor Bloomberg's house or Jamie Dimon's house, or it's a protest tactic. So, I definitely do not admire the Westboro Baptist Church because they're basically haters. But it's an effective tactic, and there's been quite a lot of legal back and forth about it. A lot of cities have passed laws setting up no protest zones around funerals that have time limits to them, like an hour before, an hour after. Some of these zones were like incredibly large, they're like thousands of feet or something like that, specifically to protect the kind of sanctity of a funeral. But it is a tactic, and it's obviously very effective because they're a very small group, but they get a lot of press. So
okay.
I wouldn't
Lisa,
say that I
your
admire
thoughts?
them, but it's...
I mean, I don't really know that I have much more to add about that. I mean, it's like, sort of the questions earlier, it's like there's different politics. Tactics are tactics, but what's the politics and motivation and intention behind it? And when it's to discriminate, build fear, hate, I can't support it. They have a right, but I don't support it.
And
so
Dr. West,
so mean-spirited. It's cold-hearted and mean-spirited. I mean, the very spirit of a tactic has to be taken into consideration with the tactic itself. I mean, even, for example, protests of Brother Bloomberg's house, there's a way of doing it that is not vicious and mean-spirited, and it's geared toward a system that he's running. And if he comes out of the house, you can even escort the brother and tell him, hope he gets to where he's going safely, to let him know that this is not just a personal thing. I mean, this is what we learned from Martin. A lot of people thought, well, and Martin King's march was mean-spirited. No, it was mean-spirited if you were tied to the injustice. But if you listen closely to what was taking place, the spirit of the marches and the tactics was actually a way of opening all of us to something much broader and better. And it doesn't seem to be that this fellow Baptist, I'm Baptist myself, so I've got some fascinating bedfellows as it. But Brother Martin was Baptist too. He got some bedfellows. But it's just too much mean-spiritedness. I mean, look at the caricatures of our Islamic and Muslim brothers and sisters, Prophet Muhammad. They might have the right to do it, but it's so ugly and vicious and mean-spirited and cold-hearted. It has to be called into question, even if on libertarian grounds you say people have a right to engage in that kind of ugly behavior.
Another question. Let's move on here. This comes from someone who says, I am a student of Morgan State University, Baltimore's premier historically black university, with a rich history of social protest. I have found students on campus were cynical and apathetic about the Occupy movement. How can we remind young black students of their part in this movement? What are the racial dynamics of this this protest.
Why were they cynical? I want to hear more from the young brothers and sisters. Because,
Why were they cynical?
Yeah, when we went to jail for stop and frisk, we went to jail for them. Now, why are they going to be cynical for folk going to jail for them? Unless they read the New York Times. See, so you don't understand what the movement's all about. You see, if you think it's just a vanilla affair, which is what the New York Times projected, then they might be cynical, but they haven't dug deep enough to find out what was going on. The Occupy the Hood movement, you had a whole slice of chocolate folk right there every day. And when we went to jail with one reason. We're going to jail because we love young people, and 87% of those who are stopped, and it's 700,000 every year, it's 1,800 every day, are black and brown. But we would do the same thing if they were white, because lives are precious. It's a matter of justice. So I would want to press the brothers and sisters. I was just at Morgan State today at that magnificent radio station there as well. I'd have a conversation with them. Why were you cynical? What was your perception of the movement? Did you get deep enough into it? Why did you go to jail with us?
So, Lisa, why cynical? A corollary of this is what a lot of other people have been texting in, which is we don't understand the message of the movement. The movement is there, but there's no manifesto. There's no clear message. There are no tenets that we can sort of see in a bullet-pointed list and sign on or not.
Couple different things. Totally down with your comments.
I'm down with you too, sister.
A couple different things to menopause. I'm going to keep track of it all. First of all, I think a lot of young people today, you got to remember, a lot of young people have grown up over the past 2 or 3 decades of pretty much predominant conservative ideologies and practices, and there's not been as much awareness about the rich history of organizing. And one of the reasons I love Occupy is because now all these young people are going to have a different embodied experience of something, of ways that we could be. There's no question that in the Occupy movement, issues of racism and power dynamics and privilege have been alive and well and integral and to almost every Occupy on the ground. And it's been a real dynamic struggle and challenge. Just like, Occupy basically reflects our dominant culture in many, many ways. And a lot of those young white men, bless their hearts, who want to make a change, are trying the best they can, and they take a lot of space, right? A lot of the women get marginalized in that process. Like, yo, dude, what are you doing, right? Of course, a lot of people of color who've seen this go down many times are like, all right. And now we've got these young white kids coming up to the hood telling us how to organize, even though we've been doing it for 30 years, right? Because they're all inspired because they've been doing it 6 months and they think they know the world, right? So, the truth is that we are in a moment that went from 0 to like 99 in like seconds in the grander scheme of the world. And we tried to throw up a tent of the 99%. That is a lot of people. And that is a lot of different cultures and experiences and perspectives, right? And there is no one demand that can possibly do all this at one point in time, even within a year. We hardly even know each other. We're babies, right? So, I think we have to understand that, this is a huge experiment. It's flawed, but there's great potential. And I tell you, there are more young white people who are grappling with racism now, right, than I've seen in many generations. We've had different rounds, but it's been part of the discourse and the challenges out there. And so I think that that's really important as well. And then I think the last thing is that, again, Occupy, if your measure is like people in a space, right, then of course maybe we have failed because the state came down and kicked our ass and kicked us out of the space, right, and is doing everything they can to keep us from taking any other. But it has evolved from the stop and frisk to the homes to labor struggles. In every different aspect of organizing for justice in this country, it has been affected by Occupy and changed and shaped. Not enough yet, we can keep going, but we're on the path. So I honor that, particularly as a person of color who's looked at injustice for so long in this situation, that there's not nearly enough white people that are on the page that need to be on, but this is a possibility to actually shift it even more. And so we have to be patient. It's life work. And we're going to make mistakes, but we can help each other, and that's part of the thing. Is how do we work to support each other in this transformative process, as opposed to aiding the state and continuing to be divisive and pit ourselves against each other. So we are called to act in a higher order and higher relations right now.
Lize Mogel?
I mean, that was great. So I only want to add one little thing, which is that because just one of the directions that Occupy is going in, because it is a multivalent creature, especially because we're in a academic institution here, and there's a lot of students in the room, is the Strike Debt campaign, which is really specifically about dealing with debt, because so many people have debt. So I think, like Joe Nocera saying Occupy is dead, well, Joe Nocera doesn't know about Strike Debt. He doesn't know about all the different ways that this movement is going. And for me, that's the one that I'm really most interested in kind of watching right now and seeing where it goes. And so actually, if you're interested, just Google Strike Debt. There's like a PDF version of the booklet that's out, and you can download it for free.
I want to just add a quick story that's related to this too, because we have to remember that our schools don't really teach us about things we need to know, including the right to assemble. And my friends who are here that provided me this shirt have a project called We Will Not Be Silent. And they go out with these signs and images in the streets. And Sarah just told me this story about how they were in Times Square with these shirts on. And 3 high school kids from Long Island City came up and they're like, the right to assemble, what is that? What is that? That sounds really cool. And they didn't actually even know that it was part of the Bill of Rights and that we actually had these legal rights to assemble. And they were they're like, we want the shirts. And they're like, we're going to wear them to school the next day, right? So there's a way in which we've cracked open something that we had no idea. And there's so much more potential if we continue to keep out there wearing our politics out front.
Let me move on here to another group of questions as I scroll through here. I see people saying, how do I get involved? What do I do? And I see a lot of people writing texts and questions like, what are your views on street art and graffiti? Let me compile this. Let me put this together and ask you guys to maybe each talk a little bit about public art, political art, and maybe some of the examples that you've seen in your years that have made a powerful political statement to you. Just here in Baltimore on the anniversary of the Occupy movement, they made a giant overhead projector, projection image that said 99% and put it up on the side of the Baltimore's World Trade Center. I mean, it gets back to creativity. It gets back to the art of public political speech. Maybe give our audience that includes a lot of art students here tonight, some inspiration for things that you've seen, things that, some occasions when art has made a powerful political statement. We'll let the artist start first.
That's a little weighted. That's unfair on the artist in the panel. 3 quick examples. One of them local. The Scandinavian arts group N55, probably more than 10 years ago, did a project called LAND, L-A-N-D, all capital letters, which was a kind of dodecahedral box that was placed on a piece of land. It had a manifesto in it, instructions for how to use land. And basically the idea was this was an entirely free space. There were no restrictions on it whatsoever. When you think about public space, public does not necessarily mean free. So I think conceptually that's a really interesting project that could maybe only happen in Scandinavia. The artist Michael Rakowitz did a project in Boston a number of years ago called Parasite, where he worked with different homeless men to create these inflatable tents, basically, that were made out of like plastic bag material. And they had these kind of appendages that would hook up to hot air vents so that they would actually be inflated and heated. And they were designed to be exactly within the boundaries of what was permissible to have in public space. Like, for example, a sleeping bag. You couldn't have a tent in a structure, build a structure in public space. You could have something the size of a sleeping bag, let's say. So these were designed to be exactly within those parameters, so they were completely legal. The third is something that happened here, maybe about 8 years ago, at the Baltimore Contemporary, right around the time when Johns Hopkins was land banking in the Middle East and pushing out a lot of low-income people of color in order to build a new complex. I actually don't know if it happened. Yes, it did. Yes. And there was So the curator who was in charge of the Contemporary at the same time was very involved with SMEAC, a social justice group, and invited a lot of artists and activists to get involved and to start talking about this. And the folks who are now the Baltimore Development Corporation were really involved in this. I feel like that's sort of where they got their kind of like push forward in the beginning. And so that was a really great moment to be around in Baltimore to see where art and activism could work together. And so basically the Contemporary was used as an organizing space for a number of months.
Lisa Fithian.
On one level, it's hard to separate out because I think all protest is art, quite frankly. It's acts of art and beauty. But there's a couple things really quickly. I don't know if people saw the art, the action that was done in the UK around the tar sands oil, where people went into the Tate Museum of Art, spiraled in, put down the black tubes of oil, squashed them out onto the lobby of the Tate Museum, and then silently spiraled out. Incredible acts of artistic protest. One of the things today that's most inspiring about the Occupy movement is the artists, the posters, the printers. I mean, incredible art is coming out of the Occupy movement. If you look at the posters that came out around May Day or all around the country, people are making incredible, I'm going to use the word propaganda for lack of a better word, and I want to say propaganda in a good way. We need a lot of propaganda and posters and beauty and street art. I mean, that is one of the tools of the people, is street art and street theater and street communication. And I do a lot of what I call kicking. I have a little model for helping win strikes, and I call kicking corporate booty. And a fundamental piece of kicking corporate booty is permeating the collective consciousness about the struggle, and we do it through visuals and art. And I'm sure all of you know Banksy's work out of the UK, which is just incredible street art. And we have a lot of amazing people in this country that do the same. And I think that's maybe all I need to say for now.
Okay,
Yeah,
Dr. West.
I primarily like to highlight the music because I'm spending so much time teaching in prisons with young people. I find that music is the last form of transcendence that gets them some distance from their pain. And because I'm old school, so I bring in Curtis Mayfield, Donny Hathaway, and Nina Simone, and Carole King, and Bruce Springsteen, and Bob Dylan, and others, and relate that particular moment in the history of music, protest, art, that relates to everyday life, and see how they respond. There's an album just dropped yesterday by brother Ali called Mourning, Mourning, in American Dreaming in Color, and he and I actually did a song together on that first single. We don't know how. I told him don't trot that one out first, but at least it's an attempt to communicate. Why? Because he's part of the same tradition. Brother Lupe Fiasco right now is struggling in his own distinctive way in terms of how does he maintain his artistic integrity on a terrain where, again, big money, big corporations control recording, radio, and video industries, all tied to the bottom line. But yet there's so much magnificent resistance among the young musicians. The Mos Defs and the others, strong. Erykah Badu still out there. Very important to keep a limelight on that art in the musical form that relates so directly to the young people's wrestling with their suffering.
Let me pick up where you left off there and address a lot of people's comments revolve around protest music in the form of, in a very contemporary instance in Russia. The sort of shock art protest group Pussy Riot, and the great splash they've made across the world with taking their protest and putting it into a sort of a shocking musical form and something of a multicolored spectacle too. I mean, they really took an artistic approach to the statements they wanted to make and got, I think, immense returns in the way of attention. So what's my question, right? I don't know. A lot of people want to hear what you have to say about Pussy Riot. That's my question. What do you think about Pussy Riot?
I mean, it's not what they were doing is really so shocking. It's just what's shocking is the response from the government, which was to try to absolutely silence them, and in doing so, made their cause so much bigger and spread so much wider. Actually, I got an email from somebody a couple days ago who said that she got arrested in front of the Russian consulate in New York wearing a balaclava to protest against the treatment of Pussy Riot. And that case, and so now this is the mask law where you're not allowed to wear a mask in public space because you might be a criminal. Anyway, so there seems to be a challenge coming out of that. Anyway, I'm all for Pussy Riot. I mean, I think these are people who, they knew what they were doing. They knew that there were risks, and 3 of them are in jail. So, all the power to them.
I mean, I think it simply say it was an incredible act of courage. It's not like they were doing it in the United States, where in theory we have these rights. Russia has a very different history. So to actually do something like, and we've seen the movements growing in Russia all around the world, incredible act of courage, and they inspired people. And I think, again, it just illustrated the power of this global movement, because people all around the world responded to this situation, and I think that's incredible.
I mean, it takes us back to that line in Shelley that I noted reminds me of the poets in Plato's Republic, that he bans nearly all of them precisely because he acknowledges the power of poetry. And if you send folk to jail, and I'm in solidarity with those sisters, he's acknowledging the power of their music. The worst thing that could ever happen to an artist is to be viewed as so inconsequential and so irrelevant and impertinent and unattended to, that you're spreading laying out your whole soul, and people are looking at it as if you just, fly on the wall. No, when you sing your song, when Billie Holiday sings Strange Fruit, or when the radio didn't allow Curtis Mayfield a song We're a Winner, that put a smile on their face. They say, oh, we're being true to our calling. They take a notice of us. They discern real power, and that's a power over against their power.
Thank you. I'm going to keep sort of amalgamating comments that are appearing in multiple fashions here. A lot of people here in the audience were struck, Dr. West, by your comments about this culture of distraction, this sort of deterioration of purpose that comes with all of the frivolities that are at our fingertips. To summarize, I maybe talk a little bit more about, for example, this one I'm looking at right now says, what strategies do we use to awaken the minds of young people every day, given the constant droll of social distractions that they exist in?
Ashford and Simpson say, give them something real. That it's like the American Hamlet of Blanche Du Bois' streetcar named Desire. When you live in a world of make-believe, you either join that world or you reject it and become cynical, or you resist with a deep sense of hope based on remembrance of those who came before. Because we have to keep in mind, when people are rejecting something, there's a good reason for that sometimes. That is to say, when they see all the lies they've been told, all the mendacity, and the young folks say, wait a minute, I can't accept that. But then if they don't have a positive alternative, then they become tied within their own cycles of addiction, whatever form it takes. And so the real challenge is providing something that is substantial enough for them to acknowledge just how ugly things are, and yet still keep on pushing with their minds, hearts, and soul of living well. And we're not good at that. America is not good at that at the moment, and we haven't been good at that traditionally, but moments like the abolitionist movement, like the populist movement, the trade union movement, anti-homophobic movement, people begin to say, oh my God, is that really America? Like going to the prison. Or like when a lot of white brothers and sisters went down to Mississippi and saw American terrorism. Is that America? You don't say. I've been dealing with it for over a century. And then they realized it was that white. Get out of your bubble. You see. But when you get out of your bubble, don't jump into another one. But try to be bubble piercing.
Lisa Fithian?
I think that at a very fundamental level, humans need a purpose. We need to have some purpose. And oftentimes I say that one of our biggest problems right now is jobs. We keep talking about jobs, jobs, jobs. We need jobs. But we never really talk about what are the kinds of jobs they give us. What I want us to start talking about is what is meaningful work, and how do we bring our gifts and our strengths and our purpose, our own calling, as you said earlier, to community to meet our needs. Right? We can radically reorder our social relationships and our means of exchange and economies, but right now we're all hooked into this machine of jobs, 9 to 5, get the paycheck, follow the boss, be dead. You know, it's just like, it's like, and it's not a path to salvation, really. It's just a path to debt, really, because you think you're making real money and you don't, and then you know, whatever. The whole thing is messed up. We got to unplug from it and find meaningful work and purpose in our lives.
Lize Mogel, final thoughts?
Fight against the distraction.
Fight against the distraction. There you go. That will be the last word from our panel this evening as we get ready to wrap up our program. We're going to turn things over, though, to Mica's Constitution Day Symposium organizer, Dr. Furman de Brabander, for a few concluding remarks. But first, I just want to personally say thank you to our guest speakers, Lize Mogel, Lisa Fithian, and Dr. Cornel West. Thank you, guys. It's been a great conversation.
I would like to say thank you to the audience for coming to Constitution Day at Mica this year. Our speakers' books are for sale upstairs in the lobby at the Red Emma's table. I have to offer a sincere thanks to Aaron Henkin, our perennially wonderful and witty moderator. This is his third Constitution Day. This conference will be aired on Aaron's show, The Signal, at least parts, on YPR 88.1 FM in the coming weeks. Go forth and assemble. Whose streets? Whose streets?